Joining an elite club should be about gaining power and influence, right? Well, for some, it meant kissing a ceramic dog's backside or accepting a death sentence for ignoring an RSVP. History's most exclusive societies were often governed by rules that range from the baffling to the profoundly stupid. We've collected the 32 most absurd regulations ever enforced behind closed doors, and they're even weirder than you can imagine. 1. Before there were armies of YouTubers faking pranks for views, there were the Sons of Malta. This 19th century American fraternity was built on a single, sacred rule: to orchestrate the most convoluted, pointless, and publicly mortifying pranks on their new members. This was not simply placing a tack on a seat. We're talking about theatrical productions involving costumes, scripts, and dozens of actors, all conspiring to make one poor guy question his sanity. They were the pioneers of weaponized absurdity. Their entire constitution was essentially a guidebook on increasingly elaborate methods for bamboozling people. You could argue they weren't so much a secret society as they were a well-funded organization devoted to the fine art of being a public menace for laughs. 2. And if you thought rich guys with too much time on their hands were a modern problem, allow me to introduce the Scourers. This was another crew of wealthy, perpetually drunk English aristocrats whose only real rule was to unleash maximum chaos upon the public. They were true artists of inventive harassment. A classic move was to encircle some unsuspecting person, draw their swords, and gently poke them until the terrified individual performed a dance for their captor's amusement. Another fan favorite was a charming activity they called lion beating, which involved grabbing someone by the nose and repeatedly introducing their face to a nearby wall. They were basically powdered wig-wearing agents of anarchy, proving that limitless money plus profound boredom is a recipe for a very bad night for everyone else. 3. Over at the highly respected University of Virginia, a secret society known as the Hounds embraced a unique interpretation of secret by being as loud and public as possible. Their one cherished, unbreakable rule was to periodically streak across the main campus lawn, completely in the nude, while howling at the sky like a pack of deranged coyotes. This was not a one-off hazing prank, this was their entire brand. Imagine you're a student, cramming for an exam, high on caffeine and despair, and you glance out the library window to see a dozen future senators and CEOs, fully nude, just barking their lungs out at the moon. You'd probably just close the blinds and assume your brain had finally snapped. It's a special kind of chaotic energy that screams, "We have the intellect for a top-tier education, but the judgment of a toddler." 4. Imagine the most intense job interview of your life, brought to you by the medieval Persian assassins, or Hashashin. Their leader, the Old Man of the Mountain, had a recruitment rule that was nothing short of diabolical genius. To guarantee unwavering loyalty, he would allegedly drug prospective members with a potent dose of hashish. Once they were unconscious, they were transported to a hidden, lush garden paradise, complete with flowing wine, ripe fruits, and beautiful attendants. Upon waking, the recruit was told, "You are in heaven. This is the reward that awaits you if you serve me faithfully." After a day in this bliss, he was drugged again, waking up back in the dreary real world, now utterly convinced he'd seen the afterlife and ready to do absolutely anything to earn his return ticket. Forget a 401k. Their signing bonus was a preview of eternal paradise. 5. Let's pop over to Yale University, the breeding ground for the infamous Skull and Bones Society, a group so secretive they make the FBI look like an open book. One of their most legendary initiation rules involves a ritual of absolute emotional vulnerability. New members are taken into their headquarters, ominously called the Tomb, where they must stand before the group and confess their entire, unabridged sexual history. Every clumsy first date, every embarrassing moment, every single detail from adolescence to the present day. Just picture it. Future world leaders and titans of industry, gathered in a dimly lit room, forced to air out the kind of personal stories most people bury forever. It's a masterstroke of psychological manipulation, creating an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of shared weapon-grade cringe. 6. Now let's consider the ancient Druids, those enigmatic robed figures from Celtic history. We know they functioned as priests, judges, and lore keepers, but we have almost zero specifics about their beliefs. The reason? Their one single, most critical rule, which was also breathtakingly impractical, none of their sacred knowledge was ever to be written down, not a single word. Their entire culture, laws, history, poetry, and complex religious doctrines spanning tens of thousands of verses had to be perfectly memorized. A Druid's training could take up to 20 years to complete. Think about that level of mental pressure. It's like a final exam that lasts for 2 decades, with no study guide. One Druid having an off day could accidentally delete centuries of his people's heritage. Wait, was the goddess's sacred animal a boar or a bear? A boar feels right. 7. From a society that punished intelligence to one whose only rule was a monument to pointless perseverance. Meet the Everlasting Club of England. Their founding principle was deceptively simple, but unimaginably tedious. The club must never, ever cease to be in session. It was mandated to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, forever. Members had to sign up for shifts as if they were guarding a priceless artifact. But instead of protecting anything, their sole duty was to simply occupy the room. Can you imagine that conversation? Sorry I missed Christmas dinner, dear, but I was on the 8 p.m. to midnight sitting shift. The club needed me. What a scheduling nightmare. All right, lads, who's covering the Wednesday pre-dawn slot? Peterson's out. His dog is having a birthday. We need someone to stare at the fireplace from 3 to 5 a.m. It represents the most heroic dedication to the most meaningless cause in human history. 8. If you've ever suspected that your brain is just a decorative ornament, then the Order of the Blatherskites is the 19th century American society for you. It was founded on one magnificent, unimpeachable rule. Any member who uttered something intelligent, coherent, or even remotely sensible was immediately issued a fine. The entire point of their gatherings was to revel in the glory of speaking absolute, unadulterated gibberish. It was basically a verbal festival of nonsense. You can just picture their meetings. A man stands up and proclaims, "I have concluded that clouds are just the ghosts of spilled milk," and is met with thunderous applause. Then some new guy accidentally remarks, "Well, based on recent rainfall, I project a strong harvest," and the room falls silent. The treasurer just pinches his nose, pulls out his book and says, "That's a 5-cent penalty for making sense, Gerald. You know the rules." 9. If you thought your local neighborhood watch was a bit over the top, let me introduce you to the Leopard Society of West Africa. This was a secret organization that took the idea of vigilante justice to a terrifyingly literal extreme. Their single, chillingly effective rule was that all their ritualistic executions had to be disguised as animal attacks. Members would cloak themselves in leopard skins and arm themselves with sharp metal claws and teeth. They would then hunt down their targets, typically individuals deemed a threat to the community. The objective was to leave a scene so convincingly brutal that everyone would blame a wild animal, not a clandestine group of men engaged in deadly cosplay. It is, without a doubt, the most elaborate and horrifying method of achieving plausible deniability ever devised. Having a secret password is one thing. Having your main club activity be a meticulously staged fake animal mauling is something else entirely. 10. Back in 18th century London, a group of wealthy young men returned from a trip to Italy with a newfound and dangerous obsession: pasta. They dubbed themselves the Macaroni Club, and their one unstated but fiercely adhered to rule was to be as outrageously fashionable and flamboyant as physically possible. The absolute pinnacle of this was the wig. We're not talking about a simple hairpiece. These were towering architectural wonders of powdered hair, often so tall they needed internal scaffolding for support. These things were practically their own ecosystems. They were so massive and required such vast quantities of flour for powdering that the club was actually blamed for contributing to bread shortages among the city's poor. They were literally taking food out of people's mouths, so their hair could be 3 feet taller than everyone else's. That's not just a fashion statement, that's a declaration of war on common sense. 11. Finally, we arrive at the logical conclusion of all human endeavor: doing absolutely nothing. The Do-Nothing Club, which existed in the 19th century Netherlands, had the most simple and elegantly profound rule of them all: complete, total, and uninterrupted inaction. The members would convene in a room, settle into comfortable armchairs, light their pipes, and then proceed to remain entirely silent and motionless for hours on end. The first person to speak, make an unnecessary movement, or even suggest an activity was immediately fined. This was a cult of lethargy, a sanctuary of supreme idleness. They weren't meditating, they were engaged in competitive relaxation. It represents the ultimate rebellion against hustle culture, a secret society devoted to the glorious and sacred art of just sitting down and shutting up. Frankly, after all the chaos of these other societies, it sounds like paradise. 12. In the golden era of American fraternal organizations, a club known as the Improved Order of Red Men was formed. The catch? Its members were all white guys. Their foundational rule was to construct their entire identity around the most cartoonish, stereotypical, and frankly insulting caricature of Native American culture imaginable. They referred to their local chapters as tribes, their meeting places as wigwams, and documented their history using pictograms instead of, the alphabet. They tracked time using names like Cold Moon or Worm Moon and started their calendar not from year 0, but from the year Columbus arrived in the Americas. It's like a bunch of suburban dads decided to build a clubhouse based solely on the illustrations from an old tobacco pouch. The sheer level of blissful ignorance needed to look at that entire setup and conclude, yes, this is a very normal and respectful thing to do, is truly breathtaking. 13. Let's journey to Poland, and to a secret student society known as the Filamato. Its members were a collection of intellectuals, poets, and future revolutionaries. They also had a rule that sounds like an absolute nightmare for anyone with social anxiety. Every single member was mandated to maintain a personal diary of virtues and vices. In this journal, they had to painstakingly record their moral triumphs and, more critically, their failures. And here's the horrifying part. During their regular meetings, they were required to stand up and read their most recent entries aloud to the entire group. Can you even imagine? All right, everyone. For this week's failings. On Monday, I coveted my neighbor's new horse. On Wednesday, I was lazy and only pretended to read my philosophy assignment. And on Friday, I told my roommate I liked his poem, but secretly, I thought it was garbage. It's like mandatory group therapy, but with a public self-snitching component. 14. You've probably heard of the Hellfire Club. The name conjures up images of dark, terrifying rituals and genuine devil worship. The reality, however, was significantly dumber, and frankly, a lot more pathetic. It was basically a social club for incredibly wealthy 18th century English aristocrats who were dying of boredom. Their primary rule was compulsory participation in parody religious services. They weren't actually summoning demons. They were just trolling the established church for their own amusement. They would dress up in bizarre monk and nun costumes, get outrageously drunk, and perform twisted, satirical versions of a Catholic Mass. It was the historical equivalent of a bunch of billionaire edgelords getting together to complain about organized religion. You can just picture a guest like Benjamin Franklin, sitting in the corner, watching a duke in a cheap devil costume try to baptize a goat, and thinking, I could be inventing something useful right now, but sure, this is fine. 15. Ever had a severe case of the Mondays? Well, in 19th century Belgium, an entire secret society was formed to elevate that exact feeling into a sacred weekly ritual. The Society of St. Monday was a club for laborers and craftsmen with one simple, beautiful rule. You absolutely do not work on Mondays. Ever. Monday was not a day for toil. It was a day for drinking, gambling, and general revelry. They referred to this as worshipping Saint Monday. This wasn't just playing hooky. It was a ritualistic act of defiance against the grueling 6-day workweek. You can just imagine the conversations. Hey, Jean-Pierre, the foreman wants to know where you are. Tell him I am at the tavern, deep in prayer, honoring the benevolent Saint Monday. I shall return to work on Tuesday, most likely with a splitting headache. It's quite possibly the most relatable secret society in all of history. 16. Let's revisit Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, because one bizarre rule was simply not enough for them. One of their most important ceremonies, the Gnostic Mass, requires the congregation to consume a cake of light. Sounds pleasant, doesn't it? Well, the official recipe, as dictated in their sacred texts, includes common ingredients like meal, honey, and olive oil, but also calls for the fresh personal bodily fluids of the officiating priestess or priest. You did not misread that. The rule was to bake a sacred wafer using your own, let's call it personal essence, and then distribute it to the group as a holy sacrament. This takes the concept of putting a little bit of yourself into your cooking to a whole new, deeply disturbing, and frankly unsanitary level. It's the one potluck in history where you'd be actively discouraged from asking for the recipe. 17. Imagine you're an 18th century Catholic nobleman, and the Pope, who basically has God's personal cell number, just excommunicates anyone in your favorite club, the Freemasons. What do? You start the Order of the Pug. Of all the majestic, powerful animals they could have chosen to represent them, a lion, an eagle, a freaking bear, they picked the one dog that looks like it was designed by a committee that had never seen a dog before. And the initiation rule? It was a masterpiece of engineered absurdity. To prove your devotion, you had to get on all fours and kiss the posterior of a porcelain pug statuette. You can just picture the brainstorming session. Okay, we need a secret oath that demonstrates unwavering loyalty. I've got it. We make them kiss a ceramic dog's butt. It's the ultimate filter, instantly weeding out anyone with a shred of self-respect, leaving you with only the most committed members. 18. For centuries, the Freemasons have cultivated an image of mystery and enlightenment. But back in their early days, their membership rules were less about moral character and more like a ridiculously strict bouncer at the universe's most exclusive club. One of their oldest and most foundational rules was the principle of the perfect body. To even be considered, a candidate had to be entirely free of any physical blemishes, deformities, or mutilations. Got a slight limp from a war injury? Denied. Missing the tip of your pinky finger? Go away. Have a gnarly scar from wrestling a crocodile to save a small village? Doesn't matter. You're damaged goods. The supposed logic was that an offering to the grand architect of the universe had to be flawless, as if God was some kind of cosmic HR manager who'd toss your resume for a typo. 19. Deep in the rural communities of Scotland, there was a clandestine group of horse trainers who called themselves the Society of the Horseman's Word. Their entire existence, their most guarded secret, revolved around one central rule. You had to learn a single magical word. This wasn't just any word. It was the word, a mystical utterance that was said to grant the speaker absolute, almost hypnotic, command over any horse. The initiation ceremony to learn this word was a deeply secretive affair, involving strange oaths and rituals performed in barns in the dead of night. Was it an actual magic spell? Probably not. It was more likely a clever combination of advanced animal psychology and good old-fashioned theatrical misdirection. But the idea that you could learn one specific sound to unlock a horse's mind is easily the greatest marketing gimmick for a training course in all of history. 20. Have you ever been so determined to get out of a social engagement that you briefly considered faking your own death? For the Rosicrucians, that wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a core tenet of their advancement. This mystical society, which emerged in the 17th century, claimed its members held the secrets to alchemy and eternal life. Accordingly, the ultimate rule for their most enlightened masters was to achieve invisibility. This didn't mean they could literally vanish. It meant they were expected to meticulously stage their own deaths, hold elaborate funerals, say goodbye to their loved ones, and then secretly relocate to another country under a new name to continue their esoteric work. It's the most dramatic and high-effort ghosting in human history. Imagine the final letter. My dearest family, I have tragically perished. The funeral is on Friday. P.S. I'll be in Geneva, living as a clockmaker named Franz. 21. Let's jump to 1850s America, a period of intense political division. In the midst of this turmoil, a new political party emerged, officially called the American Party. But no one knew them by that name. They were universally known as the Know-Nothing Party. The reason was their one, brilliantly simple and utterly infuriating rule. If any outsider asked a member about the party's platform, its leaders, or its activities, they were under strict orders to reply with a single phrase, "I know nothing." That was it. It was the ultimate political defense mechanism. Imagine trying to conduct a debate with one of them. "Sir, can you clarify your position on tariffs?" "I know nothing." "What about your plan for westward expansion?" "I know nothing." It's a strategy that is simultaneously the dumbest and most genius thing imaginable. How can you possibly criticize a politician's platform if they refuse to even admit they have one? 22. And we're back in England, because of course we are, for the Fraternity of the Yellow Bellies. Their initiation rule feels like it was dreamed up by a child who was given too much sugar. The ritual required the new recruit, called a tadpole, to lie flat on his back with his stomach exposed. The senior member, or great bullfrog, would then ring a large bell right over the initiate's belly. Immediately after the ringing, the stomach, now officially designated a yellow belly, was drenched in beer, which the tadpole then had to lick off himself. It's a multi-sensory experience of humiliation. Every single step of this process is completely and utterly pointless, which is probably the whole point. It's the perfect fusion of strange noises, public embarrassment, and the tragic waste of a perfectly good pint of beer. 23. Welcome to the Hemlock Club at Harvard University, a secret society for intellectual rebels, or, more accurately, for professional arguers. Their one and only guiding rule was to automatically and fiercely take the opposing stance on any popular opinion or widely accepted truth. It didn't matter what the subject was or what the members' personal beliefs were. If society at large adored something, their sworn duty was to despise it. If everyone in the room agreed that water was wet, a Hemlock Club member was honor-bound to stand up and deliver a passionate, articulate, and completely wrong argument for why it was, in fact, dry. The club was built entirely on the principle of being that guy in every conversation. It was less of a secret society and more of a training academy for internet trolls, long before the internet was even invented. 24. The Molly Maguires were a secret society of Irish-American coal miners in 19th century Pennsylvania, formed to fight back against horrifically exploitative working conditions. They were not subtle. Their most feared and effective rule involved the delivery of a coffin notice. Before they targeted a cruel mine supervisor or a corrupt official for retribution, they would first deliver a terrifyingly simple warning. It was a piece of paper with a crude drawing of a coffin on it, sometimes with the intended victim's name inscribed within. It was the 19th century equivalent of being sent a skull emoji, except infinitely more bone-chilling. It was a promise, a message that said, "We see you, we know what you did, and this is your one and only warning to either fix your behavior or prepare to need one of these for real." It's one of history's most stark and effective uses of psychological warfare. 25. The Knights Templar were the elite special forces of the medieval era, a brotherhood of warrior monks shrouded in armor and mystique. They lived by a strict code of over 70 regulations that governed every conceivable aspect of their lives, from prayer schedules to battlefield tactics. And buried within this hardcore rulebook was one absolute gem. A knight was strictly forbidden from ever kissing his own mother. You could cleave a man's skull in two with a broadsword, no problem. You could endure weeks of brutal siege warfare. But giving your own mother a quick peck on the cheek after returning from the Crusades? That was a serious violation. The official reason was to enforce absolute chastity and avoid worldly attachments, but it really sounds like a rule created by a founder who had a deeply awkward relationship with his mom and decided to make it company policy. 26. Ever ignored a call from an unknown number or tossed out a piece of junk mail without a second thought? In medieval Germany, that kind of behavior could get you legally executed. A secret society of judges, known as the Vehmic Courts, operated as a kind of parallel shadow justice system. If they wanted to summon you to their court, they'd nail a notice to your front door. Their central rule was terrifyingly simple. Ignore the first summons, and they'd send another. Ignore the second one, and they'd get annoyed. But if you ignored the third summons, you were automatically found guilty in absentia. Every single member of the society, scattered across the entire region, was then authorized and obligated to hunt you down and kill you on sight. No trial, no appeal. It was like receiving 3 spam emails, and the third one unleashes an army of assassins. 27. If you've ever rolled your eyes at a ridiculous corporate job title, allow me to introduce you to Clampus Vitus, a fraternal organization born in the American West. Their entire reason for existing, their one guiding rule, is to mercilessly mock the pomposity of other serious, self-important secret societies. They achieve this primarily by bestowing upon themselves the most absurdly grand and utterly meaningless titles imaginable. The head of a chapter isn't called a president, he's the noble grand humbug. Other esteemed officers include the Clamper Historian, the Royal Platrix, and my personal favorite, the Roisterous Escutis. What do these roles entail? Absolutely nothing. Their meetings are a glorious mess of drinking, storytelling, and dedicating historical plaques to completely bizarre or insignificant events. It's a secret society for people who think secret societies are fundamentally ridiculous, a concept so meta, it borders on genius. 28. If you thought kissing a porcelain pug's behind was the pinnacle of weird initiation rituals, hold my drink, because 18th century Scotland is about to raise the stakes. A high society gentlemen's club called itself the Beggar's Benison, a name that sounds quaint and rustic. It was not. Their primary initiation rule was, to put it delicately, a deeply invasive physical examination. A prospective member was brought into a room filled with lords and landowners, where he was required to expose his private parts for a formal group inspection. The existing members would then bless them. This wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was a literal, hands-on appraisal, as if they were judging a prized bull at a country fair. You can just imagine the club president peering down and declaring, yes, excellent form, Bartholomew. A credit to the organization. Welcome aboard." It is without a doubt the most bizarre, awkward, and profoundly unnecessary hazing ritual in human history. 29. In a world obsessed with chiseled jawlines and perfect symmetry, one 18th century English club took one look at conventional beauty standards and said, "No, thank you." The Ugly Face Club was exactly what its name implies, but far more exclusive than you might imagine. The one and only rule for entry was that a prospective member had to be genuinely, breathtakingly, and undeniably ugly. This wasn't a club for the merely plain or slightly awkward looking. This was the major league of unfortunate faces. They were scouting for men whose visages could stop a clock from across the room. You can just picture the doorman turning people away. "I'm sorry, sir, your nose is far too symmetrical. And is that a charming smile? Get out of here, you handsome monster. We have standards to maintain." It was the one place on earth where a man could walk in, have the room go silent at his spectacular collection of facial imperfections, and hear the president whisper, "My God, Reginald, you're magnificent." 30. You likely remember Pythagoras from your high school geometry class. He was the brilliant Greek mathematician who gave us that famous theorem about triangles you promptly forgot after the final exam. Well, that same brilliant mind also founded a secret society with a #1 rule so utterly bizarre, it defies all logic. The most sacred, unbreakable law of the Pythagoreans was this: absolutely no beans. That's it. No chili, no bean salads, no bean burritos. Why? Because this mathematical genius was utterly convinced that beans contained the tiny reincarnated souls of the dead. To him, eating a bean was not just having a snack, it was an act of cannibalism. Legend has it that he was once fleeing from enemies and came to a halt at the edge of a fava bean field. He refused to step into it, choosing instead to be captured and killed rather than touch the forbidden legume. He was ultimately defeated by a vegetable. 31. The Mohawks of 18th century London were less of a secret society and more of a mobile unit of terror, operated by rich, bored aristocrats who were immune to consequences. Their primary rule was to invent ever more creative and cruel ways to torment the citizens of London after dark. They weren't your average street toughs. They were connoisseurs of bullying. One of their signature moves was called tipping the lion, which involved gouging their thumbs into a victim's eyes and then punching them in the nose. Another favorite pastime was to find a woman wearing a large hoop skirt, trap her by putting a barrel over her, and then gleefully roll her down a hill. They were basically cartoon villains come to life, a stark reminder that before the internet, trolls had to be much more hands-on and physically active in their work. 32. And now we pop over to Oxford University, home of the Bullingdon Club, a long-standing dining club that doubles as a finishing school for some of the world's most destructively privileged young men. Their most infamous tradition is a beautiful, two-part performance of chaos and capitalism. Act 1. A group of members, clad in bespoke, multi-thousand-pound tailcoats, will rent out a private room in a restaurant. They will then proceed to get extravagantly drunk and systematically destroy the entire room. Tables, chairs, artwork. If it can be smashed, they will smash it with aristocratic glee. Act 2, and this is the crucial part of the rule, is to immediately, while standing in the wreckage, pull out enormous wads of cash and pay the horrified owner for every single bit of damage, often 2 or 3 times its actual value. It's the ultimate power move, a statement that says, "My fleeting amusement is a viable economic stimulus for your business." It's not just vandalism, it's performance art for people who view the world as their personal playground. It seems the first rule of starting a secret society was to abandon all common sense. We've presented 32 pieces of evidence for that theory, but history is a bottomless pit of weirdness. So, the floor is now open. What's the one mind-blowingly dumb or bizarre secret society rule that we were completely ignorant of and failed to include in this list? The best and most obscure entry wins eternal bragging rights in the comments. While you're proving your superior knowledge of historical nonsense, show your support with a like and subscribe.